Today, we're diving into a quiet revolution that is happening on your dinner plate. The U.S. government just dropped its new dietary guidelines for 2025, and let me tell you, it's not just a little update, it's a complete teardown of everything we've been told about food for the last 40 years.
To really get the scale of this change, just ask yourself this. What if everything you ever learned about the food pyramid was suddenly turned completely on its head? Because, believe it or not, that's pretty much exactly what just happened.
So on January 7th, 2026, the government didn't just release some new recommendations. They announced a historic reset of U.S. nutrition policy. I mean, that's a huge statement. It's a radical break from decades of dietary advice. So let's start by looking at the most glaring change of all.
And that big change? It's the picture itself. For years, we've all seen that MyPlate graphic. Well, that's gone. The pyramid is back. But folks, this is not your grandma's food pyramid.
Okay, so on the left, you see the MyPlate model we've been using since 2011. Pretty familiar stuff. But now, look to the right. Whoa, the pyramid is literally inverted. Suddenly, protein, dairy, and healthy fats are at the top, sharing the most important spot with fruits and vegetables. And whole grains, the thing that used to be the foundation of a healthy diet, they've been kicked all the way down to the tiny tip at the bottom. This one image signals a massive, fundamental shift in how our meals should be built.
The administration really framed this change with a clear, back-to-basics philosophy. Here's a quote from HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He said, "These guidelines return us to the basics. This is how we make America healthy again." So the message is pretty clear. They want to move away from complicated formulas and back towards simple, whole foods.
All right, so what does this return to basics actually mean for your grocery list? Let's unpack the new rules of the road, which all center around one core concept: eat real food.
The entire policy is really built on this idea of real food. The official definition is whole, nutrient-dense, naturally occurring foods that are minimally processed and rich in essential nutrients. Basically, think about foods your great-grandparents would recognize, not products that were invented in a lab.
So when you boil it all down, it comes to 5 key changes. First, protein becomes the priority at every meal. Second, that whole war on fat that has shaped dietary advice for decades, it's officially over. Full-fat dairy and healthy fats are encouraged. Third, and this is a big one, we're told to actively avoid highly processed foods. Fourth, added sugars are supposed to be eliminated. And finally, refined carbs like white bread are seriously scaled back.
Now check out just how dramatic this protein shift is. The old guideline recommended about 54 grams of protein for a 150-pound person. The new guideline nearly doubles that, recommending an average of 95 grams. This isn't just a little tweak, it's a complete recentering of our entire diet.
And this right here is maybe the most groundbreaking part. For the first time ever, the guidelines aren't just suggesting we limit certain foods. They are explicitly telling Americans to avoid highly processed foods. This is a direct shot across the bow at a huge portion of the modern American diet.
A change this drastic just begs the question, why now? Well, the government's rationale is that the country needs a total health reset. And honestly, the data they're pointing to is pretty stark.
The core argument is that the United States is in the middle of a national health emergency. Not some slow-moving problem, but an active crisis. And it's being fueled almost entirely by diet-related chronic diseases like obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes.
And if you want to know the biggest driver behind this policy, all you got to do is follow the money. Federal data shows a staggering 90% of U.S. healthcare spending goes to treating these chronic diseases. The administration is making a simple economic bet. If we fix our food, we'll fix our budget.
And this chart breaks down the human side of that crisis. Over 70% of American adults are now overweight or obese. And maybe even more alarming, 1 in 3 adolescents has prediabetes. The government views these numbers as not just statistics, but as a threat to the nation's future and even its military readiness.
Of course, you can't just rewrite 40 years of health policy without a fight. This shift has kicked off a massive debate, and let's just say not everyone is on board. Let's look at who's celebrating and who's sounding the alarm. The response is deeply divided. On one side, you've got supporters like the American Medical Association and the agriculture industry who are celebrating the focus on whole foods, protein, and full-fat dairy. But on the other, you have critics like NYU's Marion Nestle and the American Heart Association, and they are raising serious concerns about contradictions, the potential for increased saturated fat intake, and the environmental impact.
The central conflict for critics comes down to this: a saturated fat paradox. It's a real head-scratcher. The guidelines tell you to eat more meat and full-fat dairy, which are major sources of saturated fat. But they also keep the old cap, limiting saturated fat to just 10% of your daily calories. Critics are basically arguing that for most people, trying to do both of those things is practically impossible.
And prominent food policy expert Marion Nessel, well, she didn't mince words. She called the new guidelines muddled, inconsistent, contradictory, ideological, and very retro, arguing they throw out decades of science in favor of an older, less evidence-based approach.
So, beyond all the policy debate, what does this actually mean for you? How will these guidelines change the food you see in the grocery store, or the meals your kids eat at school?
This isn't just abstract advice. The dietary guidelines are the backbone for all federal nutrition programs. That means the food served in school cafeterias, military bases, and what's eligible under programs like SNAP will all have to align with this new real food philosophy. It's also going to shape public health campaigns and the advice you get from your doctor.
So if you're trying to figure out the bottom line for your own shopping cart, it's this: the federal government's official advice is now to build your meals around protein and whole foods, while actively minimizing anything that comes in a package with a long list of ingredients, especially added sugar.
Which really brings us to our final question. Is this a revolutionary, common-sense solution that will finally tackle America's chronic disease epidemic? Or is it simply the next chapter in a long history of confusing, contradictory, and politically charged advice about what we should all be eating? Only time will tell.